Hi, my name is James Gurney. I want to show you how to paint this botanical study in a landscape setting. And I'll be using a flip panel. Flip stands for Foreground Landscape Isolation Panel. It isolates a plant against the background so you can paint it realistically on location. For my subject, instead of a botanical specimen, I think I'll just find a common roadside weed. I like this milkweed with the pods just about to pop. And I'm looking at the distant background, the trees and the grass in the distance. And I'll paint that landscape out of focus onto two panels using gesso and modeling paste to prime the surface. These acrylic products will give me some texture to paint over on the final painting panel. I use a large bristle brush to paint on these textures over a canvas board. And I'll be using Casein paint for the actual painting. Casein is a milk-based paint, an opaque water media. I'm mixing raw sienna with blue using a big synthetic brush. And I have a lighter color for the sky. This all has to be done wet together. So I wet the surface first, then I paint in the sky, sort of a light warm color. And I'll paint the row of trees and then the grass. And while I do this, I'll explain to you about this whole idea of focusing on the foreground. When you think about it, most landscape compositions are designed to lead the viewer deep into the scene. If there's a foreground, it serves as a framing device or a departure point for the viewer. By contrast, botanical studies typically focus up close on a flower or a plant that's taken out of context and put against a white backdrop or some other flat backdrop. What if we could merge these two ways of seeing? My goal in this painting is to bring attention to the foreground without losing the story of the wider scene. To achieve that goal, I'll need to develop a way to render a living plant with loving detail while observing it in its natural setting. Fortunately, there's an artist who's done this before, and the name of that artist is Fidelia Bridges. She lived from 1834 to 1923, and she pioneered this idea more than a century ago. She was known for her meticulous botanical studies, many of which were painted outdoors in nature. She rarely followed the convention of painting her subjects against a white background, instead using paper that she pre-toned with a watercolor wash. In her more finished works, she painted a landscape background, but nearly always the distant areas are rendered in a simplified, blurry way. According to Catherine Manthorne, author of Fidelia Bridges, Nature into Art, she telescopes the space, painting the background in soft focus so that it appears an indeterminate distance away, while the plant forms in the foreground seem to jump off the page. Bridges may have developed the idea from the influential English critic John Ruskin, who wrote, "If we look at any foreground object so as to receive a distinct impression of it, the distance and the middle distance become all disorder and mystery. And therefore, if in any painting our foreground is anything, our distance must be nothing and vice versa." Incidentally, Fidelia Bridges was willing to bear incredible hardships for her art. A contemporary recalled, "Young ladies say to her, 'How I envy you, Miss Bridges,' but if they could see her, I'm sure they wouldn't. She sits for days in the hottest, breezeless corners of fields working, or in a boat with the reflected sun glaring up under her umbrella from the calmest of dead waters, and all the time she has the same delicate grace of manner and speech as if she was in her own parlor." So I've got big masses for the sky, the row of trees, the grass, and now the lower area where I want it to be dark so it all ties into the bottom. All this I want to soften and blur because it's all wet together right now. Paintings usually begin in chaos and softness, and they end in detail and exactitude. So 2 identical panels, the painting panel and the flip panel, twice the size of the painting panel. So using Fidelia Bridges and Ruskin as a guide, I've now got a plan. Really just about any of the weeds along here will be fine. I want to paint probably some of the milkweeds with the fully developed pods. And I have this easel here. Now what I'll try to do is put this behind some of the lower Queen Anne's lace and things like that, and so they'll be silhouetted against this, and that'll give me some detail at the bottom. What this panel then gives me is a substitute background that matches the background of the painting, and whatever appears in front of this background panel I can include in the final painting. I set up the flip panel on its own easel behind the plant that I want to feature. It has to be bigger than the painting panel because it needs to go behind the plant, and I want the apparent size to be about the same from my perspective. This is what the actual plant looks like from my perspective. This makes the translation from 3D reality to 2D painting very easy and straightforward, because all you're doing is painting what you see. Painting has to be accomplished in a day or two, though, because the plants will move and change over time. I like having a variety of tones, big tones, out of focus to work against, including that dark tone for those trees, because now I can work those light seed pods against that dark tree tone. I hardly think of this kind of botanical study from life as a form of still life. You could call it still life if you want, but it's very much alive and very dynamic. You can almost see the plant growing and changing before your very eyes. The older leaves decaying, getting ravaged by insects and fungus, and then the plant putting its energy into the seeds, which will soon be floating away in the breeze. And then the Queen Anne's lace has had its time of show. Now the blossoms are curling up. I'm applying pigment with a painting knife to get some randomness. Any amount of detail that I lavish in the foreground will create depth in the picture. The most delicate little tendrils will be interesting to look at because that background is all out of focus, just the way it would look to our eyes. Now, for those of you who follow my work here on YouTube, I recommend you check out my page on Substack. I post regularly, like 4 times a week, for free subscribers. You can subscribe by giving your email address or just visit the site. I'll put a link in the description. And those who are moved to support me can pay for the deep dives on Wednesday, where I go into detail on some practical subject about painting. As I go back in space, I can paint some of these things a little more out of focus as they disappear into the distance. When you think about it, just about every painting is the story of translating 3D reality into a manageable 2D rectangle. Part of that translation is a filtering process, where the infinite detail available from the real world is reduced to make the interpretation possible. I welcome any device or method that makes that process easier. Using such tools is never a mechanical process because these tools deepen my understanding of how selectively my attention is distributed in a scene. Selective attention is a key part of any artistic temperament. Emile Zola once said, "A work of art is a corner of creation seen through a temperament." The joy of art is that it allows us to see the world vicariously through the temperaments of other human beings. It doesn't take long for the casein to dry, and once it's dry, I can take a universal picture varnish to restore the luster and deepen the darks, making the painting look just like an oil painting. Well, the sun has gone down, the crickets are chirping, so I guess that's my signal to pack it up before it gets completely dark. And I won't be able to find my paints and my gear that is strewn across the ground. As you can see, this method is a nice way to isolate the elements you really want to paint in a complex natural setting, to get that crossover between a botanical study and a landscape painting. Don't forget, while you're at it, to subscribe to my channel and check out my website, and I got a playlist of really fun videos along these lines and a video that continues this story.